Calling this meeting to order, Monday, April 8th, 6 p.m. Cherry, could you do roll call, please?
Rosie Bugenhagen? Here. Erica Connor? Jake Hagenthal?
Here.
Gail Lesage? Here. Dale Porter?
Here.
Vito Schwartz?
Here.
Carolyn Simons?
Here.
Greg Vertz?
Here.
Sherry Winchowski here.
This is an open meeting and has been posted. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, we don't have any presentations tonight, so we're going to move right on to citizens' comments.
Up first is Sherry Winchowski. Sherry, you have 3 minutes. I'll give you a 30-second warning.
This should be good. I'm saying this to the community as well. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord. I have found this to be true in my life, even in the darkest places. First and foremost, I would like to thank the many students, staff, and community members who have supported and encouraged me during my time on this board, and especially during this campaign, when several of them were personally criticized and unjustly treated on social media. It has been a privilege to work alongside you and to do the work it takes to make this the great district it currently is. It seems the climate of our community is one that favors black and white, right or wrong, with little openness to listening, learning, evaluating, and compromising. The word transparency is frequently used, and yet, in my humble opinion, I am not always seeing transparency in the actions and conversations that are happening both at and away from the board table. That being said, I would like to use the Pledge of Allegiance to share a few final thoughts as a board member. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. There have been comments made regarding experiences in the military giving certain privileges. I would like you to know that I have sent 2 sons off to fight for that flag, one who is still serving and is currently in law enforcement. I do know what this means and the sacrifices that are given, and yet my boys are humble, not entitled, and will be the first to say, mission first, people always. And for the republic for which it stands. This phrase stands for unity. It is the responsibility of the board to build unity in our community, not tear it down. We are supported and funded by all the residents of the district. Our district logo states, students, staff, and community. It is your responsibility to see to it that our needs and what is best for all students is communicated to the entire community. Do you believe we need a new middle school? I believe from working with you, you all do. You need to prove it to the community that this is the case. You need to think out of the box and get out there and put some personal effort into it. One nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all. I do not believe having a board that is of one mind makes for unity in our community. I do not believe that having some people backed with money, power, and unkind words on social media while others stand on facts and experience is a just, but that's what it is. I would implore you as individuals going forward, that you think of yourselves. Remember, this is nonpartisan position. It is your responsibility to take into account all students, all staff, and what is best for the whole community. Sometimes a decision may bend what you do in your own home, but as you state this pledge to our country, you must remember, this country was built on freedom, diversity, unity, liberty, and justice for all, not just those you like. You do not have to give up your values, you just have to consider the values of others. In my experience, when you consider the values of others, you have honest, open dialogue, are willing to brainstorm and compromise, you will find that most people are looking for the same thing. And that is the best for our future generations. Thank you very much, all of you, for the opportunity and privilege to serve on this board for all these years. Thank you again to everyone who supported me. I did my best and more. Now it's up to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cherry. I also want to take this time to thank you for, I want to take this time to thank you for your 12 years of service in the community.
Next up, Lisa Pease. 3 minutes, Lisa. I'll give you a 30-second warning. Thank you.
State law claims that school board elections are to be nonpartisan. It also prohibits walking quorums. We know the lust of power has made those laws obsolete in our community. WISRED admits that they interfere and that they have interfered in this community too. Wisconsin is the second leading state to have political interference in its school board elections. Their goal, WISRED, is to privatize education because in all authoritarian-controlled countries, the less educated your population is, the easier it is to control them and have power over them. I hope and I pray that your political affiliations don't destroy this community. Heavenly Father, lift the veil of Satan from the red armies of China, the red armies of Russia, and the red armies of the United States of America, and lift the veil of Satan from those whose hearts know that you, Jesus, are the judge of heaven and earth. I ask this in his name. Amen.
Thank you. Up next on the agenda is the consent agenda. We're looking for the approval of the school board meeting minutes of March 18th, 2024. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, consent agenda is approved. Moving on to recognitions.
Thank you. Before we get into the ones that are posted, the WASBO recognitions, I did just want to take a minute to thank both Erica and Cherry. As a new superintendent, Erica, you were one of the first board members that I had the opportunity to talk to. I've appreciated your leadership, your guidance, your support, your push, your nudge all along the way. Being new to a district, being new to a community, I appreciate everything that you have given me as the new superintendent. Cherry, the same. I appreciate the calls, the guidance, the insights. One thing when you come in new, you have no experience. You have the experiences that you had elsewhere, but you do need to have people who ground you. And both Cherry and Erica, you've done an excellent job of that with me, and I truly appreciate that. So I wish you the best in the future. I wish you a lot of enjoyment with your new free time. Because for anybody who is watching and anybody in the audience, the amount of time that our school board puts into their work is substantial. We meet for 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes it goes a little bit longer. We do that twice a month. But there's a lot of work that goes on in order to be prepared for those meetings, a lot of questions that gets asked of administration so that we can be prepared going into those meetings. So I wish you the best with that time, and I thank you so much for everything you did. And as my computer just closed, we do have 2 recognitions tonight. The first is for Ken Franz, Jamie Jesse, and Mike O'Haver. So Andy Wegner in the back, he is the leader of our buildings and grounds. We all know him. We see him in many capacities. For those of us who work with him and see him in the morning, we will notice that he's probably been plugged in for 2 or 3 hours the night before because of a fire, because of whatever's going on in the school. His work ethic, it does bleed over to his team. So Ken Franz, Jamie Jesse, and Mike O'Haver have all successfully completed the WASBO Facility Manager Certification Program. So this is additional schooling, it's ongoing education. We received this notice on March 26th. And so, Andy, thank you for your mentorship of these guys, and we really appreciate their work. Their learning makes our organization better. The other person who was mentioned, thank you, Tom, was Andy himself. So Andy has been named the 2024 WASBO School Facilities Manager of the Year. The award, the nomination, everything that goes into Andy, that went into this nomination, recognizes and congratulates him for his work. But I think as we see him day in and day out, it doesn't matter what we need done. If it's a roof repair, if it's plumbing issues, if it's a route that is in the pipe over at Clarendon, and Andy and two of his guys are here at night, there's nothing that he passes off to anybody else. He is willing to get his hands dirty and take on whatever task. His commitment to making sure that our schools are open, clean, safe, every day, you see it in what he does. He truly lives his work. So Andy, congratulations on behalf of the school district. We really appreciate your work. He will be acknowledged formally at the spring conference coming up in several weeks. So thank you, Andy. Congratulations. And yeah, if the board has anything, but we really, truly appreciate all you do for us, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And we thank you as a fireman as well. Thank you for that.
Can I say something to Andy?
Absolutely.
Andy, you're the best, and your guys are the best, and I want you to pass that on to them. The things they do and the people they care for is amazing. So thank you very much for all you've done for me and for what you've done for the district.
He's a good farmer, too. Just move it to the side of the road when you see my car coming, okay? I don't want to drive behind you.
Done? Moving on to policy.
So tonight, we have two items under policy. We do have the proposed board meeting schedule for next year. A couple of key features on it. We are proposing the idea of having a school board meeting on July 29th, but no committee of the whole in July. We would do any committee type updates at the June 24th board meeting to be prepared for the meeting on the 29th. So if there's anything that would require a two meeting, we would go June and then into July to get that business wrapped up. The other key component of this is just in September. It'll be a busy month in September. We'll have on the 23rd the committee of the whole, followed by a week later the budget hearing, the annual meeting, and the school board meeting at 7:30, and then 8:15. Otherwise, we'll meet twice a month. Generally speaking, it will be the second and fourth Monday, but we do have the holidays in November, in December, and then spring break in March that we have to work around for that calendar. So the weeks will get a little goofy there, but we'll be staying essentially with the same cadence of meetings, with the recommendation that we go to one meeting in July and then having the annual meeting in September of this year.
Carolyn?
I just have a question, and I'm fine with this, but does 7 o'clock start? I assume we do that just to allow as many community members as possible to be out of work to come to that budget hearing. Is that why we choose 7 o'clock for that?
Correct. I think by statute, Tom, it's usually 8 o'clock, but the board has approved its 7 o'clock start in our district's history. Yep.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you. And then the next item that we have on there under policy is just we have the election results from the election last week. You know, they do speak for themselves. As it pertains to the referendum, just want to give you an update that we met. The election was Tuesday. We had a meeting on Wednesday, and we are having an upcoming meeting this Friday to kind of do an after action on the election results, particularly as it pertained to the referendum. And then what steps we would come back and make recommendations to the board with for the questions that were asked, and see where we need to go from there.
All right, thank you. Moving on to personnel topics.
All right, so you have in front of you the first draft of the support staff handbook. And as I mentioned last time, we've been working on this for the past probably 6 weeks or so. And the updates, a little bit different than the professional staff handbook where we were redlining and green lining. With this one, we really just started from scratch. Again, we have historically had a special education support staff handbook, a support staff handbook, appendixes, and so what we did was just took Neola's version of their support staff handbook, took our current versions, and really just created our own. That was far easier than trying to give you 3 copies that had been redlined, greenlined, and having you look through all of that. So some of the biggest updates that you'll notice, one is that we've obviously aligned practice to policy. So there's policy linked to whatever it is that we're expecting our staff to do. Additionally, we've outlined the employee groups that this support staff handbook applies to. One of the, I would say, most common questions I'm asked from support staff is around the type of leave that they are entitled to, because again, many of our support staff are not benefit eligible. And so we were excited that we could clearly define types of leave, including allowing our support staff to be entitled to take a bereavement leave. We think that that's, again, a culture builder, allowing staff to grieve their loved ones' losses. And so that's clearly defined. And then lastly, we were able to outline an evaluation process for our support staff employees. So those are some of the key, I would say, changes in comparison to what had been in existence. We will continue to update this for you and bring it forth as a discussion item, and then additionally, or lastly, an action item.
I really appreciate all the links.
Yeah, it's very.
Makes it very easy. So thank you.
Sure.
Any questions or comments? All right, thank you. Moving on to student learning topics.
Okay, so Michelle and I are here tonight to go through the 6-5 math curriculum process and to discuss the recommendation that we'll make for the board on April 22nd for the resource adoption that we are recommending. So, do you have the clicker? Just to remind the board, and I know most of you have been through this with social studies, either 7-12 or K-5 with me, but we do have a curriculum review and adoption cycle in the district. It involves year 1 being a research year, and we're going to kind of break each of those down during the presentation. Year 2 being the pilot year. Year 3 then being implementation, which is where we'll be next year with K-5 math, and then a group of years where we're monitoring and making adjustments from there. So during the research year, which was our year 2022-23 that we'll be going through, this year is really about evaluating the current program. Where are we happy? Where are we possibly seeing data slip, or we have pockets of data that we're not happy with, and really analyzing that. We spend the year researching best current practice. Because we are on a 10-year cycle currently, curriculum cycle in this district, best practice changes, and we try to keep up with that continually, but it's definitely a time when we're in curriculum process that we stop, pause, and really make sure that we're doing best instructional practices with students. We spend time sending teachers to conferences, very specific, in order to build best instructional practice knowledge and connect with professional organizations that maybe we wouldn't in between. We define a program philosophy, and then finally, any new courses, which really doesn't apply to K-5 math, because we're going to continue to do K-5 math, but that usually happens in the research year. So specifically for K-5 math, our research year involved the following things. This is where the board was gracious enough to allow us through ESSER funds to hire our two elementary math coaches. If you remember right, we also hired a secondary math coach, but because we're talking K-5, to highlight, we did have 2 elementary math coaches the last 2 years to really help with part of this process. We spent 22-23 as a staff really unpacking standards, and layman's term unpacking standards would be that we're taking the K-5 standards of teaching math, and we're just making sure that the definition of those are normed for all of our staff, and that we're in agreement on what's taught in kindergarten, what's taught in first, and what's taught in second. So that was really a year-long process on and off that the teachers spent doing that. We did evaluate our current program, which is everyday math in K4, and then big ideas in 5th grade, to see how we felt those were meeting our needs or not. We spent our time by the end of this year, which Michelle will talk about a little bit more, reviewing several math resources and narrowed it down to the 3 that we really wanted to spend our time looking at as a district in our pilot year. And then finally, we developed a math instructional framework. And what this is simply a framework that'll guide how we believe math should be taught in the classroom. And so it's really about norming our classroom practices for math and ensuring that we're teaching math in a way that research would show that we believe is best for students to learn. So how did we go about that? We spent quite a bit of time taking a look in that research year at Marzano and Hattie's research-based instructional strategies. So these are 2 very well-respected educational researchers who have agreed upon together. They both publish and speak separately, but together they've agreed upon 8 strategies that research clearly shows is good practice in the classroom. So we spent time looking at that. You will see those elements all over the MASD instructional math framework. Then we also took a look at the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the 8 effective mathematic teaching practices. So there's content for teaching math, but there's also for teaching math practices that help to develop math competency in kids. And if we do these things from kindergarten on, if we teach kids to pose purposeful questions in math and to connect concepts in math and many of these things that are on there, that's supposed to help transcend the content even and make the content easier to learn. So we spent time as a district taking a look at that and making sure that we were comfortable as a district with those. And then finally, as we do with each process, we develop a belief statement in math. And while this is an activity that we can put on a shelf and maybe not look at again, we are really striving to make sure that we are going back and checking this once we've written it, that we're really checking it, and we don't lose it anywhere in the process, that these are the things that are helping to guide us. And then our standards of mathematical practice. So again, between when we did this adoption and the last time we did an adoption, Wisconsin state standards for math have changed, and there's some key shifts in the Wisconsin math standards, and many of these are involved in the mathematical practice. So definitely have spent quite a bit of time looking at these and having these discussions as a staff.
All right, then year 2 was this year of our math pilot. During this year, we explored curriculum resources and best practices, as Stephanie mentioned. And then we had groups of teachers try out materials and gathered their feedback. And then tonight, we're here to recommend a specific resource. So on the screen, you will see the group of math pilot teachers at the end of last school year. We gathered interest in who was willing to pilot for math this school year. We have 40 teachers who participated in the math pilot. You can see that there were 3 different resources that we piloted, but each teacher only piloted 1 or 2 resources. We just did not feel it was best for students to be put into 3 different math resources in one school year. I do want to give the teachers on the screen a shout out because the amount of time and effort and work that goes into piloting a resource, learning a new resource once or twice in a school year, there's just a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into it. And this group of teachers was not only positive the entire time, but very enthusiastic. And it was just a really great group of teachers to work with. So I just really want to say thank you to all of them for participating this school year.
We're super blessed as a district that when it comes time to do a pilot, that we always have an overwhelming response. Hopefully that will continue, but yeah, huge shout out to those teachers because it's a lot of work.
So then this past summer, we had math pilot teachers come together. They sat down and watched presentations of various math resource publishers, and they voted on the resources that they would like to pilot. So they had some input in what they were piloting this school year. Then this fall and this winter, teachers who participated in a math pilot, they received training for each of the resources they were piloting. So some of them had 2 trainings, some of them had 1. The math pilot teachers at the end of each of their pilot cycles or sessions filled out a math pilot form that basically went over all of the things that Stephanie talked about earlier, because the reason we looked at those strategies and those instructional practices was so that when the teachers were going through the process, they had a lens through which to look at the resource. So we knew what we were looking for. And then throughout, we had math pilot meetings and check-ins. The publishers were great about sending math pilot trainers to do checkpoints with our teachers. So if they had questions throughout the pilot process, they had that opportunity to learn and grow and make the pilot a success. And then this past spring in March, I met with each grade level team for a half day to discuss the resources, and they made their final votes. So as Stephanie has mentioned, and I've mentioned throughout the last few years, whenever we do an adoption, the first place we look is at our standards. And so for the math standards, we created documents for our teachers that house them very quickly at their fingertips so that they know where their math standards are. But then we also created shorter documents for them that showcase the focus standards for each of those, because there are tons and tons of math standards, but then we have the focus standards, the ones that kids absolutely have to know by the end of a grade level to be successful. And so those are all housed here. I had mentioned earlier that we had a few different math companies come out. So the 3 that we landed on were not the only ones that we had considered. We actually had 5 different math publishers come out. And at the end of the day, after looking through our MASD instructional framework and the things that we knew we were looking for, we whittled it down to 3 from this list. I'm not sure how to click on this from here, so I don't know if I can get it. Okay, so this is the math pilot form that we had each teacher fill out at the end of each of their pilot sessions. You can see it's broken down into content and standards, so did they feel that it covered the standards well enough? The next category was instructional design, and if you keep scrolling, there's technology piece, an assessment piece, and then ease of use for students and teachers. And so all of the things that Stephanie and I have talked about are encompassed in this math pilot form, so the teachers were able to go through and leave comments and rank each of the math pilots based off that. Right, and then this is just a really broken down version of what the pilot looked like, just to really see how long and how much time goes into these. So the first math pilot went from September 5th through December 1st, just knowing that in order for us to get a real true understanding of a pilot, we had to spend a few months with it, a couple months with it. And so you can see the training dates that were listed there, the pilot dates that each of those resources went through. For the first pilot, September 5th through December 1st, and then pilot number 2 was December 4th through March 7th. And then again, we had those dates in March where I met with teachers, and then obviously tonight we are here to recommend a resource. If you could also click on that for me, Tom. So in reviewing the math pilot materials, this was the agenda that was used at the meetings that I had with each of the grade level teams. So you have access to all 36 pages of the notes that we took. So basically we came together, I met with grade levels for a half day, Monday through Wednesday. And what we did was we basically had each group who piloted. So for example, the Envision group for kindergarten would sit down and they talked about what are the pros and what are their cons, because we know that no matter what we adopt, there are going to be pros and there are going to be cons. And then we have to talk about, can we overcome those cons? What are the things that we're going to need to do to make sure that this is the best resource possible for our students? And so we engage in conversations. So you can see all of the pros, all of the cons in this agenda. And then if you can go back to the slideshow. The 3, you can see that Bridges, iReady, and Envision Math were the 3 that the teachers piloted and talked about. And then at the very end of the meetings, we asked teachers to vote, and we told them that they could vote for whatever resource they felt was best, regardless of whether or not they had piloted it, because we knew that not everybody had gotten to pilot everything. And so our pilot voting results are here. We had 88.9% of our teachers vote for Bridges, So that would be out of 36 responses, we had 32 teachers vote for Bridges. The 4 teachers who did not vote for Bridges did not pilot Bridges and just really liked the resource that they piloted. And so I just thought that was important to note, that at the end of the day, the teachers really, really felt that Bridges was what was best for students after hearing what their colleagues had to say and even popping in and visiting classrooms that piloted things that they didn't pilot. I did feel it was important to go through some of the strengths and the reasons that teachers felt Bridges was what was best for kids. Standards aligned, this is so important. A lot of publishers can say that their resources is standards aligned, but once you start digging in, you start seeing that there's gaps. And that's what creates work for us and having to do curriculum writing, is because when we see there's a gap, we have to fill it. And what we liked about Bridges was that we felt that when it said that something was covered, it truly was covered in both the assessment and in the lessons. And so that was huge. The student engagement, teachers talked about how kids were talking to each other in ways they'd never talked about math before, that they could take kids of varying ability levels and put them together and they could engage in conversations. And they just felt that it was building a sense of community. I had one of my kindergarten teachers tell me she had a brand new kindergarten student start, and that she truly felt that the math class was where that student started to make friends because she had so many interactions where she could talk and play games, and that was huge for community building for that student. Part of Bridges is something called Number Corner, which is a little bit like Calendar, but very, very math-oriented. And that is where teachers said the math spiral comes in. What's really important to note is that a lot of our resources that we looked into would teach a concept or a skill and then move on and never come back to it. And teachers were looking for something that spiraled because they felt kids weren't truly mastering something when only seeing it once and never getting again. And that Number Corner provides that spiral, that the kids are being exposed to things continuously on a routine basis, so they were truly learning it. Workplaces is another component. It's basically math centers that are very much like games. The kids love them. They get to do them every day, and it's also the time of the day where the teachers can differentiate and work with students in small groups if need be, or just sit down and play the games with the kids as well. So that's been huge. It's one of the things that kids say they love best about this particular resource is workplaces. The vocabulary that's used is cohesive. It goes across grade levels. Again, I mentioned that teachers feel they can differentiate very easily. Assessments, all of the assessment documents label which standards each question covers. So you know at the end of the day you are really covering what you need to cover. Teachers felt the assessments gave them great information and weren't too long, which was one of the negatives of some of the other things that we piloted, that the assessments took forever and the kids were getting really upset. That was not the case with Bridges. Kids love it. They're excited to do math class each day. One of the teachers told me during the meeting that her kindergartners asked her if she was going to make sure the sub did Number Corner while she was gone today because they did not want to miss it. So she was sure to tell us that at the meeting. There's a home connection piece, so that bridges that home family communication with school. Bridges is hands-on. It does not have a lot of technology, and the teachers said they love it. They love the fact that the kids are getting off of the computers and they're actually engaging in conversations with each other and not just playing games on a computer. So that was a huge draw to Bridges. It aligned really well with our Mukwonago Area School District math instructional framework. And finally, they were hearing kids use math vocabulary more than ever. And I do want to point out that one of our kindergarten classes made us a book that I'm going to leave with you to look at, why they love Bridges. That was super cute. All right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
On the previous 2 slides beforehand, which you don't have to go back to, but on the voting results, you had mentioned that the teachers who didn't vote for Bridges didn't pilot it. Were there other teachers who did not pilot Bridges who did vote for it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And again, that was from being in other teachers' classrooms because we encouraged them to do some visits, and just what they heard, they're like, my kids were not as excited about math as the kids in the classroom next door, and it swayed them.
Okay.
Gail?
I would just like to say I was excited to see that you want Bridges.
Gail, talk to your microphone, please.
Oh, I was excited to see that you wanted Bridges. I worked through Bridges and used it with kids, and it was, they loved it. Math was their favorite, and it was neat too because it would carry over from kindergarten to first grade. They'd walk in the first grade room and they'd be like, oh, I know what that's about. You know, it was like a self-esteem thing too, and made them feel comfortable right away. And all the things you're saying, the interaction, and it changed our math scores, and the foundation it laid, that was really solid because of the way it goes through things. So I'm real excited to see what it does here.
Yeah, the teachers who piloted came in that enthusiastic. I mean, I think it was contagious. It truly was. Listening to a teacher who taught it and loved it, just it spread, because that's how excited they were to talk about teaching math.
Yeah, that's what I still feel excited even because I did but I was just like, wow, this is it. It just gave them such a solid base. So, and they were excited, and the games are great. And I mean, parents would come in for conferences, and the dads would be like, okay, what's this game that's going on, and so you really drew the parents in more too with a lot of the things that go on in it. So it's a lot of prep for teachers.
It is.
Start off, a lot of prep. So
Yes, and actually, before Stephanie goes in, I do want to talk about that because you just reminded me. I gave you a whole slide of the strengths, but the one negative that came up again and again with Bridges is that it is a lot of teacher prep. It is a lot of work. Bridges will actually say that in the overview of the entire program, that you have to give teachers a lot of prep time. That first year especially, because all of the workplaces need to be built and made. The manipulatives that come have to be organized and stored. And so just us knowing that and creating a plan to make sure we're supporting the teachers and giving them the time they need and the support they need to make sure that this is implemented successfully. So that would be the one negative that I did want to make sure I mentioned, that we know that we're going to come up with a plan to help them through that.
I can help if you need.
I would love that.
We went through a lot of bumps doing that.
So this will be the first time during an adoption that we are actually making a separate decision for one of our buildings, and that is Eagleville. Well, we're making the recommendation K-5 for math in the other 5 traditional elementary buildings in the district. Because of the nature of Bridges and the fact that one of the things about Eagleville is that it is multi-aged, Bridges does not work well with multi-aging. We really couldn't see a situation where we could make it happen in a split grade classroom and feel good about the fidelity of the program and the fact that it would still be good for kids. And so Eagleville also spent their time in the pilot exactly like the other buildings, but piloted it just in Vision and iReady. We are going to recommend Bridges for kindergarten at Eagleville. If you remember right, kindergarten at Eagleville is not multi-aged. It is just a kindergarten classroom. And so we do still like Bridges to give that solid base in mathematical practices and concepts to the students. And so our recommendation involves Bridges for kindergarten, but then iReady, which was the second choice of the other teachers. And I really do want to emphasize that iReady is also a top quality math product, that we run all of the resources that we're going to pilot in the district. Before we pilot them, we run them in ed reports and make sure that they're getting the highest of high ratings. iReady also did that, but hands down is the most compatible with our multi-grade classrooms. And so while we've been working on Bridges in 1st through 5th grade in the other buildings, Teresa Jones really dug in. She's our math coach that was assigned to Eagleville, and she has really dug in with those teachers and creating unit plans and pacing guides that we feel like will be best for our students at Eagleville and the multi-age. So costs, this kind of outlines the costs of the program in the first year. So each of the buildings by number of students, and then Eagleville going a separate direction with iReady. We do budget during each year for whatever cycle we're on and implementation process we're on, $300,000 towards implementation and the buying of a resource. And so in this case, it actually, with a product that we could not be more excited about, it's actually under. Now, that's a little bit misleading because I do want to mention that we are going to need to do some purchasing of organizational things with Bridges because it involves so much. And so we feel comfortable that we have the money for that too. That's not something that we ask board to approve organizational things, but just to mention that even though we're under, we do have some other things that we're going to need to spend money on to make sure that the program works. The other thing I should mention cost-wise, we currently do this with EDM every year. There is a budget to replace the workbooks, and that is the case. Instead of paying for those workbooks up front, we find that it is better. It's about $40,000 a year that we're pretty used to paying for EDM. It just transfers over now to being bridges. We find that better. First of all, it does spread the cost out. But secondly, if they make changes to bridges, they will update, and we'd get the updated versions of the workbooks. So we will have that annual cost that we can cover in the student learning budget.
Is the district office fee the time that you've spent doing the pilot and everything, or what is that?
No.
Oh, so the district office, that is actually because we have special education teachers that change grade levels. And so what we do is we purchase all of the grade levels and we house them at district office. And so as they cycle through, you might need it first grade one year and then they need second grade. So they'll send the first grade back to me and then I send them a second grade. So we just have those housed. And then if we have grade levels who fluctuate, sometimes we have 3 sections of something, sometimes we have 4. So then we have that.
We find that if we just send them to the building, sometimes they get lost. And so we call them district office and we collect them back and redistribute them as need be to try to make sure that we are keeping track of our materials.
All right, so then next steps for math. We have a community viewing night coming up April 16th. Stephanie and I will be here from 5:30 to 7:30 for parents to look at and put their hands on the materials. I also had given registration link and directions in the board updates. So if any of you wanted to go on to Bridges, you can go on and look at the student and the teacher materials. I kind of did a slideshow walking you through that process. And then board approval would be April 22nd. And then after board approval, we can start purchasing the resources. I'm making a plan for summer work. We have some trainings that we will get scheduled as well with teachers for July and August. They only have to go to one of those dates. And then next year will be implementation year.
Questions at all?
I have a quick question. Could you go back to the third last slide with the, I think it was the pros? Yep. When I see Bridges is hands-on, it doesn't have kids on technology. I'm not sure how to think about that because is it because the kids don't, maybe it's too much, kids need to have a break from technology, or can you explain that a little more in detail, please?
Well, I think we want to be careful, right? Like balance is the key because clearly we know they're going to live in a world of technology. Right. So for us as a school system to not teach students how to use technology and have some of their learning on that is not a great thing. But we also don't want them sitting all day long on technology. We know that's, and math is hands-on. There's something about paper and pencil with math and watching a student take an individual whiteboard and write on it and see their thinking process versus what you can't see on a computer. I just think that we find and we do have something like iExcel, which is a technology platform that can aid Tier 1 instruction in math, so that they'll have that. But really for math, we want them off of the computer during their learning process for it.
That really jumped out at me.
Yeah.
Anyways. Like,
yeah.
Ooh, that sounds like a great idea.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Moving on to student service topics.
All right, let me get myself situated here. So about back in February, Joe had shared with you that the district had been awarded the Stronger Connections grant for $395,000. And so I wanted to bring that back to the board tonight just to get into a little bit more detail about what we will be doing with that grant and why we wrote for the grant in the first place. So just to give you a little background information. So the grant was offered. You had to be eligible for, you had to be eligible to write for the grant under specific sets of criteria. So for our district, in order to be eligible, we had to have either 500 or more economically disadvantaged students, which we did have. We have roughly 650 students who would be considered free or reduced lunch or economically disadvantaged students in the system. And then also be looking at the correlation, the second criteria being the correlation between students with disabilities and behavioral incidents and what that data looked like. So using those two pieces of criteria as the eligibility for the grant, that's what we used, that data, to drive our rationale for writing the grant. So again, just for some background information, out of the 121 applications that the Department of Public Instruction received, only 40 districts across the state of Wisconsin received the funding. So Mukwonago area school district received that $395,000. And so we wrote that grant as a K-12 grant. The first part of the grant that I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the K-6 perspective. The second half of the grant, which is really specifically geared towards the high school, I'll bring back to the board at a later date. And so in CISA 1 area, which I don't know if you guys will hear us when we're talking about like comparable schools around our area that, you know, have similar demographics, whether it's Pewaukee, Sussex, Muskego, whatever it might be. The area schools around us that also received the grant, there were only 4 of them. It was Greendale, La Casa de Esperanza, and Elmbrook. So, and Mukwonago, that was it in our area. So it was really quite an honor to be given the grant. I have the list of the names up there of the people who really spent, it was a good 2-3 weeks of dedicated time into the grant, like full. We didn't get a ton of time to write it, and so these people, kudos to them for putting everything else aside and really digging in deep to writing the grant. So our focus when we went into the grant was really looking at what could we do for all students. I felt like a lot of grants had come out recently where it was around, like certainly around mental health, which is much needed, but instead of looking at like getting a person, I wanted to see what we could do to provide supports for all students universally. And so this was a great opportunity to do so. So the data, if you drill down a little bit more, the data that the team considered was the following at our elementary buildings. So in our 6 elementary schools, our students identified as economically disadvantaged students during the 22-23 school year accounted for 25% of all of our incidents that were behavioral incidents on the playground. So our minors and our majors, and then our students with IEPs accounted for 26% of those incidents reported on the playground. And then specific minor or major data at 1 elementary building indicated that recess was taken away as a consequence for 50% of our documented incident reports. And then looking deeper, when we looked at our school goals, you heard our principals present on our school goals earlier this year. 4 out of our 6 elementary buildings also had school goals related to behavior. So this was all sort of lining up perfectly for us to be able to write a grant. And then last, all of our buildings currently engage in positive behavioral interventions and supports, which is that PBIS. And Playworks, the organization I'll talk with you about, complements this playground aspect of the framework of PBIS. So before I go on, do you guys have any questions about the data?
Jake, just so I can get calibrated.
Sure.
So economically disadvantaged accounting for 25% of incident reports. What percentage is that of the population, roughly?
So our
economically disadvantaged?
So in our district, it's about 13%.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. It gets lingo-ish if I don't take a break. So, all right. So, and actually, I just wanted to say too, when we've met as an administrative team, especially as the elementary principal team, we've talked a lot of times about like what can we do on our playgrounds, or what can we do with our like high need areas. And so our principals have mentioned more than once the opportunity to bring in Playworks, and it's just never been something that we have been able to financially really look at. It's not a it's a costly but well worth the cost program to be looking at. And so this was really exciting for us to be able to bring forward. So Playworks at its simplest focuses on 6 key principles. Just that every kid has the opportunity to play, that kids get to choose to play and choose games that make them happy, that they have the right tools to resolve playground conflict. Our adults on the playground play alongside kids. They model and support a culture of trust and positivity. Play is rewarded. Play is not treated as a reward to be revoked. And then just that everyone is welcome to join in a game. So a couple of impact statements from Playworks. Just in general, for physical activity, recess is the best opportunity for our students to be active during the day. And students prior to partnering with Playworks generally were active about 43% of the day, and after, participation at recess increases to about 90%. School districts that have Playworks currently have seen a 43% decrease in bullying, which we have talked about a number of times at the board level. What can we always be doing again to address that tier 1, the number of bullying incidents that we see. And then students feeling safer, so 20% higher rating than non-Playworks schools. And Playworks has a heavy presence in southeast Wisconsin. And then just from the social academic learning perspective, Playworks will bring in and train I'll talk about this in a minute, but they create a junior coach in our 5th and 6th graders, like a junior coaching model. And so we'll be creating our own leaders within our buildings and our students, and I am super excited about that as well. So when we're thinking about Wisconsin teachers, and I can tell you, again, this was a really, I brought this up on April 2nd when we had our professional development, and our teachers were so excited. Like the FIAD teachers were so excited. We had a lot of teachers in the audience who have students in different districts around the area that also have Playworks, like Waukesha has Playworks, a couple of the other districts around us do also, and just have seen like a huge growth in the way students have become leaders, especially at the 5th and 6th grade level. But also just really seeing that reduction in behavioral incidents on the playground, like really has been a game changer, and so that's really exciting. They also, in total, in our area, had about 1,100 junior coaches come down to Marquette last week as their end of the year celebration. So all these young student leaders getting together to celebrate just being motivated and being good, solid leaders in their community, in their school communities, which I thought was really cool. So when we're talking about the roles and responsibilities, just a little glimpse. So with the program, we will have a site coordinator, a coach that comes into our district for 1 full week to each building a month. So a coach will come, sorry, didn't mean to throw that. Will come to Clarendon and spend 1 full week at Clarendon. They'll go out to recess every single day at every single recess. They'll work with the recess staff, so your recess monitors outside, they'll train them, they'll work with games on them, they'll work with the junior coaches, and then the following week they'll go to Big Bend for a solid week, and they'll spend a whole week there. And so it really is a full-time person for us. And then on our side, they work with, again, training that our recess staff out there, working with a key player in our buildings, likely our school counselors, to really be that person that can help implement Playworks at our buildings, and then also just working with our staff, like our FIAD teachers, just to reinforce those games of play, and then what do those expectations look like? How does our PBIS matrix fall in line with exactly what Playworks is looking for safe and responsible play? And then as far as the grant commitments, so whenever you write a grant, there's action steps, but then always like evaluation and outcomes. So what are we looking to have when the grant is over? And so our action plan will include data that needs to be evaluated and then reported out on. So we'll be looking at office referrals for both majors and minors, and we'll be analyzing that monthly, bringing that back to staff, and then also communicating it with you as a board. And then also making sure that we are communicating both the implementation and then the progression of the PlayWorks model with our parents and our community. That will be in monthly newsletters home. Well, that was a lot. Do you guys have any questions?
Jerry?
So I'm familiar with this and
Mhm.
here when we tried to implement it a couple other times. And so my question is, how long will the company send their trainer?
So we'll have for 2 years.
For 2 years?
Mhm.
And then how many extra people do they send?
So they have one person for 4 schools. 'Cause that's
But
what
I mean for the coaches, the young people. So, or will that one person just be at that school and that's all the extra help we'll get? The rest will just be on our people?
So it's one person.
One person comes as a coach from the
Mhm.
company.
Yep.
And then you were talking about all these young people that came out of Marquette, because you
So
normally-
no, those are the junior coaches.
Right, the
So
junior
those are like our students. The junior coaches are our students. So like 5th and 6th grade students that we're
Okay.
building up to be junior
Okay,
coaches.
so how many of, do they train just certain ones? How many per building? And then do you train the next year and?
So we'll have to work through some of that yet. I don't have the answer of how many kids will be junior coaches. We're just starting our partnership with them now, so I can bring that back to the board. They'll be coming out in the next month or so to do some playground observations and be able to do some preliminary planning. But they'll be working with our elementary school counselors. It's a natural connection with them, just given the PBIS framework and then just the natural, like, the lessons that we want kids to, when we have conflict, right, and then the conflict happens, like that's the time you want to intervene. That's oftentimes on the playground, right? And so that's where our counselors will also be able to work with our PlayWorks. Our Phi Ed teachers will be able to work with PlayWorks and be able to have that all the way around partnership.
Any other questions? Just want to ask about you're not going to use recess as a punishment. I just want to address it. That doesn't mean kids are not going to be punished or disciplined for poor behavior. We still have school board policy.
Correct.
To address that, right?
Correct.
So I just want to address that so everybody knows
Yep.
that we're not going to just let kids.
And I don't know that kids aren't ever going to lose recess either. I mean, I just think that we want to do as much as we can to promote positive play, right? And try to intervene before it gets to a behavioral incident so that we're teaching kids how to have positive interactions versus they're in trouble all the time and we're always being reactive versus proactive. So yes, there's still going to be disciplinary outcomes when needed. Yep.
Usually the kids who fall into that group of kids who have had to miss recess are the kids who need recess the most. Their energy's been bottled up all morning. They've sat through a 90-minute literacy block, maybe half of their math time, and they're ready to move. It's just a matter of getting them engaged appropriately such that we're not hanging like the classroom behavior over you're going to miss recess now. What we're going to use is you did something wrong at recess and we'll deal with recess, we'll deal with the classroom. And when used effectively, you see that recess participation goes way up. And then what you find, particularly through the lunch hour, is that period after lunch is much more focused than what it otherwise was. Teachers aren't dealing with behavior problems after recess the way they used to be. The class is settling down a lot better after recess than it used to, and you're not cutting into that critical time. Looking at Gail, who was in the trenches for all those years, you're able to stabilize that next period where you can increase learning and the kids had a meaningful, expenditure of energy during the middle of the day.
Any other questions, Crosby?
What's our current recess participation?
I wouldn't know that data off the top of my head. I would know the behavioral data, but I don't know our participation data.
Because one of the slides talks about a dramatic increase in recess participation, so it would be helpful to know what ours is.
Sure.
So that we can gauge success or failure.
Yeah, I can bring that back to you.
Thank you.
Carolyn?
So after the 2 years that we get this, is this something where we would pay for it? And I'm gonna use it, is this like what, like we just like try to do it on our own, like every time I fall off a diet, and I'm like, I got this.
I mean, ideally,
And
the
we
Weight
just do it
Watchers
on our own,
app
I
that
don't
you
know.
just buy. So I mean, ideally, like with anything similar to like PBIS, right? Like you go through an initial training and you do set up a framework to be successful on your own. I mean, ideally, we would want to be able to implement it as our frame of practice
Yes.
all the way, all around.
Right.
So, I mean, we'll see what it looks like. I don't want to commit to anything further than what we have. If the data doesn't show that it makes a difference, I also wouldn't want to move forward with it, right? So, like, I think time will tell a little bit. And so if it's wildly successful and our kids are, you know, like it's, then we'll have to talk about it, you know? But at this point in time, I'm just excited to start the adventure.
Do other schools have they found that they've been re-upping in it? Like Waukesha, for example, like,
Yeah, we began it, I think, 8 or 9 years ago at our 4 highest need schools. And within, I think, 3 years, it was across all of our elementary schools in the district. And then it's been maintained. So it has been something that's had a positive impact. And Rachel was a principal who worked with it in the past, so.
Yeah, I was just gonna just ask Christine, I'm like, do you want me to share? So as a principal who onboarded PlayWorks and then facilitated it for 4 years, Cherry, to your question, I think, so the model is we train all of the recess supervisors are trained by the coach in the year 1 implementation. So everybody receives professional development if you're working at recess on how to implement the PlayWorks model. The model is intended to build the train the trainer. So it's intended that the recess supervisors and anybody who is working with kids, the junior coaches, learn how to implement the model so that the coach can slowly back away. It hands down is a game changer for your school. We saw, I think, a 50% reduction in behavior referrals within our first year. It will, again, hands down change the game. It changes the way in which recess supervisors interact with kids. It changes the way in which kids talk on the playground. It was a game changer for our schools. And I know it's going to be a game changer here, so I'm excited to bring it on board.
Vito?
Just for clarification, after 2 years, do we expect any other costs? Or once it's done, once we pay for it, the idea is that we just carry on doing it without extra ongoing fees?
So there are different levels, I guess, of service that you can purchase. So like intensity, I guess, would be the best way to, like for us, we're gonna do the most intense, it's called Team Up is the level that we're looking at starting with. It's the most intense level that we could. And then there's different levels underneath. So if we wanted to get some support, but maybe not a ton of support, we could look at varying levels down the road. I think we'll have to evaluate where we're at in a year and then start planning forward.
So possible?
Possible.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a grant to write. I mean, there's always, Tom loves it when I'm writing all these grants. But they're a pain to manage. But they're worth it. So, you know, if we come to a point where we feel like this is something that we have to have, then we'll see what we need to do next.
Any other questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Moving on to finance and facility topics.
All right, the first one's, I think it's pretty quick and painless. So each year we have to designate an official district newspaper and an official bank depository. So I'm recommending that. We've done what we have in years past, that we continue to designate our official depository as Citizens Bank and the local government investment pool, so we'll designate 2. And then our official newspaper will be the Waukesha Freeman. We put all of our official notices, legal notices in that paper. So do you have any questions about any of that? Craig?
We're good.
Okay. All right, then the next thing that we had then was the SOAR building. So we've been talking about this now over 8 years, and now we're coming close to the finish line. We need a building for our alternative education students at the high school level. We have identified 917 Main Street. We've gone through all the hoops From a property zoning perspective, conditional use permits, the last hurdle we need to clear is just to finalize the sale. So in a school district, a common school district, there's 3 types of school districts, and most of them are common school districts. We are one of those. The power to purchase government resides with the electors of the school district. So you 9 could decide to buy land, but you don't hold that power. That power is held with the electors, and the electors can exercise those powers at an annual meeting or at a special meeting. There can be 2 special meetings between annual meetings in a given school year. So in order to finalize this, I'm looking for Dale, it's preferred that the president, if you're comfortable, to call for a special meeting. We'll publish that in our official newspaper, and then we would look to ultimately have that meeting then later this month. So just it's a legal process that is defined in state statute, so we're just trying to move down that path to keep this thing going. Any
You're looking
questions?
for me to do that at the next meeting, correct?
Yeah, we would piggyback that before or after the regular board meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right. Any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think just kind of want to answer some questions about the store building when we're looking to lease a building, because those questions come up about the cost and the money we'd have to put into a building and that we don't even own, and why it makes sense to buy the building.
Yeah, so first off, there's extremely, extremely limited options into where we could either lease or own. We've looked at, for whatever reason, when you have 20 kids, let's say, going to a commercial strip mall because there's a tutoring service there, that's a business. Those same 20 students go in there with their backpacks and they're going to go to school, they can't be in there. It's not up to zone. So there's just a ton of hoops, like it limits the options. In terms of leasing and, having sprinklers put in, we looked at places to lease and to invest even further into sprinklers and other, technology on the walls or smart TVs and all that basic classroom stuff. There's a lot of installation that goes into it. So you don't want to rent an apartment and put in new plumbing, right? So that's kind of, if we're going to do this, the full recommendation is to purchase, and then it's an asset of ours that we can have and hold and let it appreciate in value and keep it. So,
Thank you.
Did I answer your question there?
Yes.
Okay.
Since we seem to have exhausted all other options at this point, what would the consequences be if we were not able to purchase this building for SOAR?
I think SOAR would probably be in this room right here all the time. I think that is our absolute very last option.
Okay.
Any other questions on SOAR? All right, thanks.
All right. All right then. So then the next one here is a debt defeasance and tax levy preview. So debt defeasance is just a word for debt prepayment. So anytime you prepaid debt, I guess they call that defeasance. I don't know why. But I'm going to go up through a quick presentation here. All right. Those of you that have been on the board and have heard me speak about this, oops, I'm sorry, I got the wrong one here. Bear with me. You start counting the number of times I use the word tertiary. All right, here we go. All right, so part of this conversation is really, this is one time in the year where I try to explain really how we get to our tax levy. How do we tax our citizens? Why? How does it work? All those things that go into school finance. I'm going to just try to tell a story here, tell our story, and then it's going to kind of really just back into what prepaying debt, what the ramifications are of that, okay? So when we talk about state aid and property taxes, those two things make up 84% of all of our dollars in Fund 10. That's the lifeblood of our school district's financial situation. We can raise taxes on, we can raise prices on the amount of money we pay to attend a football game or a basketball game. Those other one-off form of revenue are small in comparison to state aid and property taxes. So we're really just going to focus on these two here. They're inversely related. So if state aid goes up in a given year, then property taxes will go down and vice versa. State aid is really dependent upon property values in a district. So if you take a look at the average property value per a student in a district, you have 7 school districts here with various degrees of average property values available in a district per student. What equalization aid tries to do is make sure that when the property base is lacking, equalization aid will then complement that such that you're not going to have a lesser financial commitment based on where you're born. You're going to have a fighting chance. If the property tax base is really low, then the state aid will be high, so that ultimately property wealthy districts aren't, you know, the only districts that are offering good public schools. So aid is split up, state aid and equalization aid. Those state aid, equalization aid are synonymous. They're really the same thing. I'll keep calling it equalization aid because the aid is dispersed through an equalized property formula. Aid is inversely related to district property values. So if you're a district with high property values, then your aid is low. If you have low property values, your aid is high. So one pot of money is split out over 422 districts. So how this works really is like a reimbursement situation, that the costs that we have in 23-24, the shared costs is what they're called. Those are costs that state government will share with us. They'll reimburse us for a percentage of those 1 year later. So this year's costs will become next year's aid, okay? And there's a couple key numbers that we're going to introduce right now, and keep those numbers with us as we move forward. First off, our student membership. For this purpose, we have 4,816 resident students. Our shared costs this year for the school district, we're estimating them to be at $56.7 million. So that's $11,787 of shared costs per student. The equalized property values, we have $5.2 billion in property values here, so that is $1.087 million of property value available for each student in our schools. All right, so the $11,787 and the $1,087,000, keep those numbers in the back of your mind as we move forward. So when we get through, how do we determine the amount of aid that our school district gets? It comes to us in 3 tiers. So we have a primary tier, a secondary tier, and a third tier or a tertiary tier. And each of those tiers is aided at a different percentage. That we have X, Y, and Z. That Z, that's our tertiary tier. That if your average property value exceeds the state average property value statewide, that value will be negative. If you're a property poor district and your average property value available is less than the state average, then that Z% will be positive. That's the biggest difference in school finance for school districts, that some are positively aided at the tertiary level, some are negatively aided. We are negatively aided. So if we spend beyond that secondary cost ceiling, that blue arrow, once we enter that, we start shrinking our aid and therefore pushing taxes up. All right, so just how do we get those X, Y, and Z percentages? Here we go. So quickly rolling through this, the state guarantees there will be $1.9 million of property value in throughout the entire school, throughout the entire state. For every student, we have over $1 million. So we have 56.4% of the state's recommended value. So the state will therefore give us aid on the other 43.6% that we don't have. So of that first $1,000 of aid, state government gives us 43.6% of those costs back a year later. So we spend $1,000 now, we get $436 back a year later. Secondary tier, the state's is going to say that there will be $2.2 million worth of property value for each student statewide. We have 1 million, just over 1 million. So we have 47.8% of the state recommended property value. They will give us the other 52.2%. So for all costs, for all costs between $1,000 and $11,787, they will reimburse us 52.2% of those costs that we're paying this year. Okay? At the third level, the tertiary level, for costs beyond $11,787, state government says that there will be at least $976,000 of property value available. We're beyond that. We have more than the recommended value. So we are 11% higher than the state average. So we are negatively aided. For every dollar we spend past $11,787, we give 11 cents back. So if we spend into that, we kind of eat into that secondary aid and we start to shrink ourselves. Okay? If you're positively aided at the tertiary level, the more you spend, the more aid you get. If you're negatively aided at the tertiary level, the more you spend, the less you might get. Okay, so that's why you need to have controls on spending. All right, I know that's not anything new to anybody in this room, but it definitely plays out here. So I'm going to show you how we're going to get 29. I'm predicting and estimating that we'll have $29.2 million of state aid this year. All right, so at the primary level, we get $1,000 of spending per student. We get 43.6% of those costs back, multiplied by our 4,800 students. That generates $2.1 million. All right, that $11,787, that's an assumption by me. I'll explain that here. That's going to represent if every school district, this average state value of spending per student multiplied by 0.9 or 90%, that's what that value is. So we don't know what that value is going to be until October. We learn about this after we set our tax levy. We have to assume that between now and October. So we have to put our best guess into what this number is going to be. And there's a lot of macroeconomic inputs into that. I could say, hey, school board, you can adopt an assumption and tell me what that number is going to be, or you can let me choose that number based on just the things I've done over 8 years here. And I'll leave that up to you, but right now that's what I'm rolling with. So for all costs here between $1,000 and $11,787, we get 52.1% of those costs back for 4,800 students. That generates $27 million. All right, I'm estimating our shared costs before we prepay debts. We're going to spend right to that level and nothing more. We're going to perfectly max out our aid. That's a perfect year right there. So we have no negative tertiary aid, and that maxes out our aid at $29.2 million. That's the best case scenario right there, okay? All right, so just in review real quick, that secondary cost ceiling, a lot of school districts got more money because they increased their per pupil amount. So we increased that value by 5.3%. State aid, when they say, hey, we guarantee there's going to be $2.2 million worth of property value for every student at that secondary tier, that $2.2 million number is written in a state statute, but it's dependent upon how much money they put into the pot for state aid. So when you look at the state budget government, they have general purpose revenue. The biggest share of that goes at K-12 schools. So at $5.58 billion, that's what they have written into the second year of the biennial budget. We're able to use that information to kind of estimate what's that final value going to be. In other words, how can we estimate that secondary percentage? All right, we're estimating that our shared cost per student is going to be $11,787, so that assumes we spend our budget as proposed, and we make a year-end transfer to Fund 46 to maximize that aid, and we don't prepay debt at this time. Now I'm going to get into, that's my final piece that I'll get to here real shortly. So the most aid we can get, I'm estimating, is $29.2 million. That would be almost a 10% increase from last year. Last year we got $27.6 million. All right. So the assumptions here real quick. All right. We're assuming that, again, there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. All right. So I'm just going to stick with these assumptions for right now. Again, in other words, it's really our best guess that we're going to spend right up to that secondary ceiling, okay, and not go beyond that. All right, so here we go, prepaying debt. We currently have $9 million available in Fund 39, our referendum debt fund, to pay off referendum debt, and by doing so, we'd shorten our debt timeline by 3 years. So currently, our debt schedule ends in 2032-33, but we could walk that back 3 years. But paying off the debt will push us into being negatively aided at the tertiary level. So here's the same math there. We would push our shared costs for our students to $13,565. So now we are entering that negative tertiary aid. All right, so we just walk through this here. You'll see that now we push $1 million back in aid. And we're at $28.1 million instead of $29.2. So the two scenarios that I have for us here real quick is that as we kind of preview our tax levy, okay, is that, again, our revenue limit, the amount of money we can get through state aid, equalization aid, and the tax levy is $54.4 million. If 29.2% of that is equalization aid, then the remaining $25.1 million would be a tax levy. We have 3 tax levies. the basic tax levies for our operating budget. We have a tax levy for our referendum debt, and then $150,000 for our school resource officers. The totality of that is $32.1 million, okay? If we prepaid $9 million, we would shrink our aid by 1.1 million, all right? So the tax levy therefore would go up 1.1 million. What we could do here is, as you're seeing on this screen here, the 6.8 million, the blue arrow on the left, and the referendum levy there on the right for 5.8 million, we can move that number to where we want to be. So one of the questions I'm going to ask the school board is, you'll see in both of these scenarios here that the final tax levy of $32 million is a 1% decrease from last year. We have enough wiggle room between both of those referendum debt levies that we can drop that number down as low as 3.1 million, okay? So it really becomes a goal of the board as to how far would you like to drop taxes, because the counterbalancing act there is how much debt would you like to prepay. The more debt you prepay, the more future interest costs that you're avoiding, which is a financially preferred move, right? The sooner you can pay off debt, eliminate unnecessary interest, and shorten your debt timeline are all good things here. So that's really a board decision. As in years past, we've had a board goal of dropping our tax levy by 0.2%. We could keep that goal going forward. You can make it bigger to maybe 1%, and we can talk about that in the coming months. But this is something that we ultimately will tentatively finalize at the annual meeting in September and a definite finalization in October. So we have plenty of time here, but we do want to look at prepaying taxes. So while there is a, in giving aid back and therefore pushing the tax levy up, the other argument is then you are avoiding future interest costs. So in a sense, it all has merit, I guess is what I'm going to say. At this time last year, you can see in May 2023, we made the decision to prepay 1.5 million worth of debt. And if you take a look at what I have in bold there, what I said last year was, in the event that we do not go to referendum, or if the referendum fails, we can use the fund balance, the $9 million, to prepay debt next April, and that's where we are right now. So this is really something that we've talked about 12 months ago and has been on our radar since that time. So really what I'm just recommending at this time is that for the next 30 days before our next May meeting, I'll study this option. I'll come back with a recommendation and let you guys make a decision. But I hope I can just kind of clarify what the ramifications are if you choose to prepay this debt. There's just some things to think about. That's it. Okay? So that's state aid.
Vito?
Does that fund balance have to go to prepay?
Yes. Yep, I can't.
Nothing else we can do?
There's nothing else we can do with that.
Building or do anything?
Nope.
Got to go to debt. Roger.
Carolyn?
Do you know what the interest over 3 years on the 9 million is?
No, but when I come back next month, I'll tell you what that is. I'll let you know exactly what it is.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Negative tertiary spending is bad, correct, Tom?
Bad, Craig. Hey,
So
nice
you-
job, Craig. There you go. At least one of you paid attention. Way to go, Craig.
Up next, action items, hires, retirements, and
Oh, we got a couple more here.
Sorry, Tom.
Sorry, I don't mean to make this meeting go
Food
longer,
service.
but I'm gonna. Okay, the next thing that we had then is food service planning for 24-25. So Pam Harris is here. Pam joined us last time. And as you know, Pam is retiring at the end of the school year after nearly 3 decades. Okay, so Pam, do you want to just come up to the table here? And she's here to help answer questions. You might have some right now. So what we're trying to do is just get your feedback in this at this part of the agenda on the ideas we're going to present to you. So if you need more info, tell us. If you think we need to have a survey to our families to get some of this information, tell us. We'll do that. We'll revisit everything we talk about again in May and June, try to make final decisions for food service by July or no later than July, okay? So some of the ideas that we talk about and bring to you right now, we're not necessarily going to recommend those, but we're going to put them on your radar, because maybe in 12 months we do, and we're not just going to spring it on you, and next May we can plant the seed now, let it, grow a little bit, and we'll decide then if we want to do it or not here. So we'll one by one go through these here. So for food service next year, after taking a look at, taking stock in the full program, looking at other districts here, one option we have to replace Pam is really, there's one of two things. One, we can hire a position, keep Pam's job as it currently is designed today, and keep her as an MASD employee that answers to you and, works for the district directly. The alternative is that we can outsource the management of our food service company. A lot of school districts do that. At this time, what I would recommend to you, and I think Pam would as well, is that we recommend that we just move forward with hiring Pam's position and keeping her position as an MASD employee. We could outsource that, and before we do this is really your call. We would issue an RFP, let companies bid, bring those results back, choose the best one based on our goals, and off we go. But in looking at other districts that outsource it, and Pam's done 3 visits recently, I did one as well, we feel that we can do all the things that they do on our own without the overhead of paying a management company. So we feel confident that some of the game plans that we have here, that we can get to the same end result by keeping it all in-house. Pam, is there anything to add to that?
I don't think so unless someone has a specific
Craig?
question.
Would the central kitchen stay if we hire Pam's replacement?
Yeah, there's a couple
Or
of
will
ways.
it stay either way?
Stay either way.
Oh, it would,
Stay
okay.
either way.
Okay.
There's 2 ways you can do that if you did outsource it, is that you could outsource just Pam's position, or you could outsource her position and all your food service employees, and you can keep the ones you have, but rather than their paycheck coming from the MASD, it would come from whatever the name of that company is. We feel that we would have better relations with our employees. They can send their gripes directly to Pam, the new Pam, or myself, and not have a middleman more.
Yeah, I'm in favor of central kitchen staying if it makes financial sense.
Yeah, the central kitchen, that's kind of a separate decision whether you're centralized or site-based with your kitchens. The district 30 years ago invested in that central kitchen philosophy, and it behooves the district to continue with that, whether there's a management company or self-operated. Good question.
There were some questions raised about, from community members about how much waste is there right now in our program, and if we add more options, what do you anticipate that would be?
Well, that's another good question.
I guess, can we answer that? Like, that's an option that's coming up when we talk about the options at the high school, middle school, and elementary school, and can we come back to that?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So I guess, is there any feedback? I guess the recommendation is that we just keep Pam's position in-house, don't outsource the management. But it's your final call here, too. Do you want more information? What would you like?
I'm good.
I'm good keeping it in-house.
Okay. All right. All right, so then, second option then that we have on the table is to hire a district chef. So Pam's a dietitian, so when it comes to like dietary restrictions and things of that nature, that's what Pam does. A chef is gonna find a way to make those dishes. How would you describe this, Pam? I don't wanna.
Well, a chef is usually a little more creative with the food prep itself, and does a lot more with training, recipe development, and more hands-on. You know, the chef would be, you can hire a chef to be the food service director. It doesn't have to be a dietitian. But if you have someone who's not a chef as the director, I really feel personally that it would be helpful to have a chef on staff to do things that I didn't have time or expertise to do. Menu promotions, enhancing the catering menu, you know, staff training is a big deal because we have a lot of great staff, but they don't have formal training in cooking. Like we used to have a program at WCTC. We sent most of our upper level employees to that. It was like a 108-hour program. They couldn't maintain enough students, enough interest in it to keep that program going, so it's no longer available to our employees, and having someone on staff to do more training would be very helpful.
So we have a number of moving parts here, obviously. There's going to be a new PAM. There's a couple things you're going to hear about in just a couple minutes. What I really would like to do is, I'm putting this on your radar, but saying, let's hold on this. Let's get the new person in. Let's let them find themselves, implement perhaps a couple of these other ideas. You can change your minds and come back in June and say, you know what, Tommy, bring that chef in. Okay, we can do it.
So you're saying, let's not make a decision on a chef?
That's what I'm saying right now. I'm putting
It
on
kind
your
of sounds
radar.
like Love Boat, the chef thing.
Okay.
You're probably not old enough to know what that
Gopher
means,
and
but
Doc?
that's okay.
I don't know
Yeah.
what it is either.
It's been a while, sorry. I don't have Nick at night anymore, Craig, so I can't watch that show. So that's an idea. That is an option. The recommendation is keep this in our back pocket and hold for now. I think there's strong consideration we can put into this. Obviously, it's an added cost, but if the chef is doing what they intend to do, participation goes up and it pays for itself, and better meals and more meals are served. Okay? So that we're going to go through options at all three grade levels here, or all three building levels. So starting at MHS, there's two areas where we can consider changes. The first one is that we can implement tiered pricing. Okay, so if you take a look on the second page, you're going to see that, you know, there's a number of school districts that have a range of values for their middle school and high school. So tiered pricing exists, you know, not at elementary, but the middle school and high school levels. So you have kind of like a good, better, best option for food. And it really just allows for students to have kind of the option to upgrade a meal. So the basic meal is going to be good, you know, but if you pay more, you can get something a little bit better, so on and so forth. And there's local districts that do that. Pam, do you want to comment a little bit more about what tiered pricing can do?
Well, and that's something you don't have to have the highest level tiered price available every single day. You don't. The question will get to the choices question. You don't have to have all those choices every day. It just allows you to have a way to offer that more expensive choice as often as you want to do it. One example I'm working on right now is soup and salad. We just started chef salads at the high school. And to put soup with it, soup, believe it or not, is one of the more expensive menu items. And to offer a gourmet soup like a broccoli cheese or chicken wild rice. And it would be reasonably popular. To do that, I really need to charge a little more. And we're going to try that yet this spring, doing an upcharge to put soup with the salad bar meal, and we'll see how many kids want to do that. We might find that nobody buys the higher price lunch, and that'll be our answer right there. So this is something you can do on some days and not other days. It's not like you have to have those choices there every day.
So I would say here that this is worth a try. This is worth looking into. Again, your call. We can bring you back more info about what does this specifically look like for us, what, you know, the costs would be, what would we charge. Do you want us to survey families and get a little bit more information?
I mean, Jake, to survey families, it really doesn't affect people that don't want to participate in it, right?
Talk on the mic, please, Jake.
Oh, to survey families, I mean, this is something that really doesn't affect families that don't want to participate in it, right?
Yeah, you can always bring your lunch from home, and you don't have to participate in the school lunch program or in our food service offerings, or you can buy the standard meal. It's just, do we want to offer something that's, you know, maybe a little more?
And I wonder if the survey would yield different results than what happens in reality when it's put in action, if the kids get to pick, right? So
Sometimes it does.
I kind of think more, let's try it.
Should
Right,
we could call it a
and see how
pilot
it goes.
and say, hey, we're going to pilot this and put some options forward, and then we'll let that speak for the results then, and make a lasting decision from that.
Do you have like percentages of waste?
We don't have data on waste, and
But you could probably speak to what you see. Like, what do your folks see, Pam?
yeah, one of the biggest problems with waste in school lunch programs is in 2012 there were some new regulations implemented by the USDA that changed the amount of food that we serve in grades K through 3. We used to be able to serve some smaller portions in grades K through 3. they changed that, so now it's grades K through 5 all get the same portion size. There is a lot of waste there, I have to say. We used to be able to do a little better job at that because we had that other option. At the upper grade levels, I think waste is associated with how focused they are on actually eating when they're at lunch. You know, if they're focused on eating, they pretty much eat what they take because they can serve themselves most of the items on the menu. If they're socially engaged and they're not focused on eating, they probably throw away more. We also are required to make kids take a half cup of fruit or vegetable. Not every single kid wants that fruit or vegetable, so some of that is waste.
So that kind of segues into the second option at the high school, which is leaving the National School Lunch Program. So the National School Lunch Program is ultimately the body that says, we will provide you reimbursements for the meals you serve, we'll help you offset your costs, we'll give you free food, but you gotta meet these dietary restrictions, these guidelines. Each tray has to have these fruits and vegetables that Pam's talking about, which, especially for the younger kids, that's what ends up in the garbage. So we're not a fan of that, but we're serving what we're required to, and therefore we have the waste, right? So as a starting point, you know, there's a handful of other districts that have left the National School Lunch Program at the high school level, and that allows for them, like basically it's, there's no reimbursement, there's no federal help and reimbursements to offset the cost of our food service program. So at that point though, then you can serve food that's doesn't have, you know, a calorie restrictions or have any guidelines. You can serve really ultimately to what your customers will take and reduce that waste. But that can also, because there's no subsidies coming in, we would have to fund free and reduce students on our own fund $10. That would be an added cost. We'd have to internalize that.
Any idea what that cost would be?
Can I bring that back to you next meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
please, thank you.
All right.
We also do know that a lot of our kids eat a lot of fruit and vegetables. So we would need to just do some better observation and collection of data to see just what is the waste right now.
Right, I see a lot of that when I go to elementary school,
Yeah,
where they're forced to take it and then
I would
dump it.
say especially in the elementary school, right?
So I would say what I would recommend just regarding leaving the National School Lunch Program is that's another thing I'd say, let's look at this for 1 year, because this is a big decision. It can be a costly decision, but it could be the right decision. So let's put this on the radar and look at this and make a decision at this time next year whether to stay or to go. Is that okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, I guess just going back to the tiered options, are we okay to pilot some of these options here next school year?
I'm okay.
I'm okay with it.
Okay, thank you. At the middle school then, we currently do not have an a la carte offering. From many school boards ago, the school board gave a directive to Pam that they don't want to offer an a la carte. So students will still get their standard lunch, but they could add a few things in addition to that for an additional cost. We could do that if you gave us the leeway to do that. So we could add, you know, chips and extra beverages, whole grain desserts, and other things for students to choose from to supplement their lunch from home or their lunch from school. And parents could put a restriction on how much Johnny is able to buy. So Johnny can't spend $7 extra, but maybe he can have a couple dollars a day or whatever it might be.
So Pam, where do you think the parents want to be here with Parkview?
Boy, I really don't know that, Craig, because I know there are parents who don't want that, you know, junk food there for their kids. They can put a block on their child's lunch account and they won't be able to get it. When we had a boycott in 2012, at the inception of those regulations I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of parents call and tell me, just have what my kid wants to eat. I'll deal with fruits and vegetables at home. Uncle Sam doesn't need to tell me what, you know, my kid should have for lunch. So I don't know. I think there are a group of parents out there who would like to see some extra choices available. It's a difficult thing. I will tell you, those extra choices are not the most nutritious foods on the planet. And do parents want their kids to only be able to choose the healthier foods?
But I think the parents would still have the ability to make that choice if there was an a la carte to say, no, just it's not going to let you take some stuff from home if you want something extra, whatever that might be. But this, again, is your call.
At that grade level, there are kids who need more than just what's in that lunch. They're able to buy extra food, but it has to be the foods that are already on the menu that day. Like they could get an extra piece of pizza or something if they need more calories. This would just give them more choices. At the high school, it's worth noting that a lot of parents put spending limits on their students' lunch accounts.
Ho-hos are expensive.
Crosby?
Would there be?
Well, we don't serve those because they're not allowed by the USDA regulations right now. So they have to be whole grain ho-hos.
If we left the National School Lunch Program, we'd have ho-ho
Well,
days.
Debbie's in.
Yeah.
Would we have an option if we were to go to an a la carte to still incorporate some of those healthier choices? I mean, parents are going to do what they want, and that's totally fine. But if we can incorporate a couple of those healthier choices, that might ease the pain a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, you can sell, within the guidelines, you can sell many, many different things. That's why we're recommending to table this discussion for a later time, because we really start getting down the rabbit hole with these questions, and they're very valid questions.
I have a different question.
Yeah.
Would that bring in revenue, or would this be a break-even venture?
If you were not in the federal lunch program at the high school, you wouldn't have to worry about making too much money, because right now we're limited on how much we can bring in and what we can spend it on. The schools that are off the federal lunch program, I'm going to say are off of it because they can charge more and they're making more money on their program.
So if we were to leave the program, there is the potential that we could make up some of that difference of the money we're going to lose by offering a la
So
carte
I
options.
think right now we're talking about the middle school, right? So at this time, I don't know that we would pull our middle school out of the National School Lunch Program. I think the first thing we would do if we went down this path is start and do it with the high school and the high school only. See how that goes and then make future decisions. So as for a la carte at the middle school, I think that's really
we
what
don't have
we're
to
looking-
go off the federal program to sell a la carte items at the middle school.
I think like at this time, what we could do is begin to like do a crawl, walk, run approach, and we could offer like something of a la carte. It doesn't have to be anything grand, but it can give additional options. We can see how that works for the middle school students, and then figure out if we'd like to supplement that further. But we could certainly start with a couple of things and just see how it goes.
Okay.
Pam, is that fair to say?
I think
like
that
that.
surveying the parents on this issue is a real worthwhile effort.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
So survey parents about how they would feel about a la carte, okay? We'll bring back more information here on that survey, and then we'll roll forward with that. And we'll just focus that on current 7th and 8th grade families. Okay. All right then, last option then at the elementary level is that we currently have 2 lunch options each day, and then we could introduce a third option that would be a cold entree, such as a sandwich or a deli lunch. Perhaps this is something that would reduce lunch, because if a student didn't like either option, that we feel like a sandwich is pretty much likable by most people, generally speaking, this would be a way to say you can take a lunch that's would avoid some of that waste. Fair to say, Pam?
Waste with the elementary schools is less of a problem when it comes to the entrees, because we do get a lunch count every morning for the elementary schools. We don't get that for the middle and high school. We don't get it for, how many kids are going to take green beans. but we do get it for the entrees. So offering another entree choice at the elementaries would not increase waste, just to address that right away.
So just to go over the process, so you get the lunch orders in the morning, right, by 9:30, I believe you said?
Yeah, by
And then
9, yeah.
And then they're made at the central office, correct?
Well, we prep everything in advance because we get the calls at 9 o'clock. We can't make everything by 9:30 when the truck leaves. So we have a real good educated guess going. And then we adjust it to match the lunch counts. So the food that we don't need, we don't send out. And we don't bake things at the high school and then load it on a truck and keep it hot for 3 hours before the kids get it. You know, we send it cold and they bake it at each of the schools. So if we keep it at the central kitchen, it just simply goes back in the freezer and waits for next time.
Okay.
Would it be a good idea to do a survey on this as well?
We can do that.
This is another one that's kind of like the tiered lunch price question. If people don't want it, they're not going to use it, and we're going to find out pretty quickly that it's not worth the effort of doing.
Okay.
So,
Gail?
I just had a question because being a teacher from younger.
Gail, talk in a microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. Younger elementary, I kind of cringe at the thought of 3 choices. I feel like if you could split it, upper elementary maybe could handle it, but for the younger ones, I mean, 2 choices is a lot, and most of the time they forget their choice by lunchtime.
yeah, we know
Or they
that.
like what they see, and they decide they want the other one. So I feel like elementary is a place to really enforce those good eating habits, good choices, and if you have 2 choices and maybe one of the, you know, like throw in a cold on a day, or Fridays make it different, something like that. But overall, I just, all my experience in elementary, I wouldn't go beyond 2 choices.
I would have predicted that all of the K-3 teachers would probably say that same thing.
Yeah.
I know of some other districts that do this, so why don't I get some more information from them? You know, their teachers, how does this work in the classroom? How does it work in the cafeteria? And come back with that.
It's just a lot of choice. I mean, when you have all these choices so young, what do you work into?
When they change their minds in the lunch line, it
Oh,
does
yeah.
become a problem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll bring back more information about this
I'd
one here then.
appreciate
Yeah,
that.
you got it.
Sure.
Okay. All right, then lastly, if you're taking a look at the memo, then we have the lunch prices there. We have our prices for elementary, middle, and high school compared against Franklin, Hamilton, Kettle Moraine, Muskego, Conomowoc, and Pewaukee, you know, comparable school districts to ours. So just to bring some attention to that, some of these decisions here that we're talking about will ultimately affect, you know, what we're charging, but this is something that we'll look to do no later than July so we can communicate with families, you know, what lunch prices will be for 24-25. So there's nothing to do with that. That's just for your information. So I got, just to recap then, I'm hearing from you that we are looking to keep our food service management in-house. We're going to hold off for now on the hiring of a chef, but we'll keep that on our radar. We're going to pilot tiered pricing at the high school level in 24-25 to see how that works. I'll bring back more information about free reduced costs at the next meeting, and that will kind of inform us about the National School Lunch Program. We're going to survey our current middle school families about an a la carte offering, and then we will also bring back more information, no survey or anything at the elementary level, just bring back more information about what a third option at the elementary might look like, and then we'll go from there. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, then, I have 2 more agenda items, but they go hand in hand. So Pam, thank you very much. All right, so I'll basically just wrap up the finance and facilities part. I know I was a little bit longer tonight, but this next piece I'd say is kind of important here. So I want to take an opportunity to take not just the board, but our community through our financial situation. Occasionally, and this happened recently, as I bring up my next presentation here. So I'm going to talk about our fiscal position with a focus on fund balance and then a review of our current year budget. Okay, so this is important stuff, and I'm going to bring up a couple articles that was in the Journal Sentinel, and I don't mean to pick on any school district, but you know, you can't help but read some of these, and perhaps maybe some of our citizens read that and wonder, well, how are we doing here in Mukwonago? So if that's the case, I'm going to take the opportunity right now to answer that question if anybody has that. So, you know, you can see here that there's situations that school districts have where something goes wrong, financially speaking, and bad things can come from that, obviously, here. So this came out just a couple weeks ago here, so there's obviously some concern in that particular district. Again, I don't mean to pick on anyone, but I just want to learn from their situation and talk about ours. And going back a couple years, there's another district that really went through some tough times there, and you might read that headline and say, well, how could they do that? What would cause them to go through $14 million in fund balance in just 2 years' time? Okay, so that's not our story. That's not happening here, and that has not been our story, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that never is our story. So I'm going to start off by talking about our fund balance and surplus funds here. Okay, so fund balance. What is fund balance? Fund balance is a snapshot of our financial position in a given year, typically on the end of the year, on June 30th. Fund balance is the difference between our assets, what we have, and our liabilities, what we owe. So assets, the key thing to kind of know here is assets includes money that has not yet been received, and we call those receivables. Therefore, it's important to note that fund balance includes money not yet received, and therefore fund balance isn't completely spendable. A common misperception is that fund balance is a cash account that corresponds to the cash in our district bank. Cash usually makes up the majority of fund balance, but not all. On this graph here, this is our actual fund balance and cash position. Our fund balance is in blue, our cash is in orange, and you can see that cash is the majority of our fund balance, but not all of it. Sometimes in certain school years, we are given money, like in the 23-24 school year, we will be given money for 23-24 in July and in August, and after the school year is already done. And I don't know why state aid for the 23-24 school year is given to us 2 months after the school year ends. That doesn't make sense, but I don't write those rules. But that's why we have receivables. So what is a proper level of fund balance? Fund balance should be an amount such that we have enough so we can avoid short-term borrowing for cash flow needs, and that we have enough to set aside to realize our long-range goals, particularly our 10-year capital plan. So for those two reasons, avoiding short-term borrowing and meeting your building needs, for those two reasons, a district should not continually apply fund balance to maintain programs, services, and technology without serious financial consequences to sustaining our existence. So it should be our goal to create a balanced budget, and that if we have a deficit in our budget, it should be because of a one-time expense, not for an ongoing expense. In some of those previous districts that I explained to you, they were funding ongoing expenses through deficit spending. I'll never recommend that to you. So what circumstances might we use fund balance? A district needs to be fiscally responsible. However, it may be appropriate for a school district to use fund balance for one-time major purchases or construction projects. The appropriateness depends on the amount of fund balance a district possesses in Fund 10. Generally, a school district should not use fund balance for ongoing expenses. This here is three pieces from our school district policy, so I'm just going to take time to read these. From Policy 6235, Fund Balance. The school board recognizes the need to maintain a healthy fund balance to limit short-term borrowing, be accessible for one-time expenditures or purchases, and help maintain a favorable credit rating to reduce borrowing costs for future referendum or other borrowing purposes. The general goal for the fund balance is to maintain amounts that may alleviate the need to short-term borrow. The fund balance should only be used for one-time purposes such as emergency repairs or any other non-recurring expenditures approved by the board. Unassigned fund balance provides working capital to finance operating expenditures, to minimize short-term borrowing for cash flow purposes, and to temporarily finance unanticipated expenditures. Accordingly, the district will seek to maintain a general fund balance of a minimum of 15%. All right, so this is a snapshot financially of the pure dollar values of our fund balance position. So this goes back 20 years. At the conclusion of the most recent 22-23 school year, we had $20.1 million in fund balance. As a percentage, so fund balance is typically measured as a percentage. So we take our fund balance position as of June 30th, and we divide that by the amount of expenses we had in Fund 10 that year. In other ways, to say how much fund balance do we have on hand as a percentage of expenditures. And last year, we had a 32% fund balance. Where does that rank? Here in Waukesha County, we are third from the left, so third from the bottom. The county average is 34%, so we don't have an aggressive fund balance, but what I would call a proper amount of fund balance that is fiscally responsible and reasonable. You know, I do have an article here from 1988. I was told during our referendum process that once upon a time our school board had a zero fund balance policy, and this what I'm holding right here is from our district auditors saying, we noticed that you borrowed for cash flow purposes $3.5 million in 1984, $4 million in 1985, and $5 million in 86 and 87. During the same time period, it has been a practice of the district to maintain a zero operating reserve by applying any surplus funds available to reduce the subsequent year's tax levy. It goes on to say, that's not really a good idea. So it's not our business to tax our citizens just to have their money and to keep it. But at that same time, you'll never identify a responsible business entity or school district that has nothing in reserve. That's a little reckless and irresponsible in my opinion. Okay? From a cash position here, you could see, so really if the board were to say, Tom, can we afford it? And I've heard that question before. This is ultimately from month to month. So July is on the far left. That's the first fiscal month in the fiscal year, and June is on the far right. You can see from the last 4 years, 2021 is in yellow, 21-22 is in blue, green is last school year, and this dark blue is this current school year. Our low water mark was at $5.4 million, and that can cover about 3 payrolls. So we could, if all funding sources ceased to exist, we could cover 3 payrolls when we hit our low water mark. You can see then in the month of January how high those bars get, because that's when our property tax revenues are received by the 11 municipalities where we educate kids. And then again, we start to walk that down all the way through June, and then we continue to walk that down from July into November and December, and then property taxes come back up. So it's just that cyclical piece there. If we didn't have this surplus here, we would find ourselves short-term borrowing in November and December, paying those costs. I would ask why. Why would we do that? Why would we put ourselves in a position where we're unnecessarily taking on costs? That's something I couldn't defend very well. As we take a look at the last, so I was hired here in 2015-16, and you can see the 8 fiscal years that I've been around for, the net change. So as we really look at our revenues and expenses, so once we have fund balance established, then it's our job to maintain it. And really what we do year to year is we measure our revenues, we measure our expenditures, and make sure that we're on the right side. So you can see 3 of the 8 years here that we had a negative amount, and there's always an explanation for that. We transfer some money out of Fund 10 and into something like Fund 46, where we're going to say, hey, let's maximize state aid. Let's spend up to that tertiary point. And when we transfer money out of Fund 10 to Fund 46, that's a shared cost. So by moving money from Pot A to Pot B and keeping taxes low, I'll always make that recommendation to you guys. But you can see that we've been able to add our net position over this time has been, revenues have exceeded expenditures by $7.2 million, while we have that's Fund 10 alone. We've simultaneously transferred funds for our building maintenance needs. We are in a strong fiscal position is ultimately what I'm trying to tell you. So we have a healthy fund balance, and it's important to keep it that way. And tracking revenues and expenditures throughout the year will help us make sure that we stay on budget. It's kind of my theory here is to aim small and to miss small. We make our expenses, and we try to hit that number. So in the next agenda item, that's my last one, is this is what we're talking about. I've brought this to you just about every month during since January, where you can see how much money in Fund 10 we have budgeted for salaries, benefits. I have those highlighted in gold because our salaries and benefits is $50.5 million of spending That's easily our biggest line item in the whole budget. That's 75% of all of our budget is people. We don't invest in capital equipment like some industries do. We don't put money into research and development. We are a people industry. We have teachers. We have people who teach kids. So it's salaries and benefits by and large. And so we look at the budget amounts that we have, what we've expensed or have what we owe added together, and what our remaining budget is. I always look at these percentages relative to this point last year to say, hey, how are we doing? Is 30.3% decent? Do we have enough money to cover payroll through the end of the year? What about 38.5% for employee benefits? I'm going to talk about salaries and benefits here in the coming slides here, but you'll hear from my next agenda item. We're in a good spot as of April 5th, as of 75% of the school year being completed. Here you can see how I kind of do this at a school level. So we're taking a look at all of our elementary schools, our middle schools, our musical programs, our CTE programs, athletics, what their budgets are, where they are at spending year to date, and how much they have remaining. Okay, I monitor this. I talk with principals and other budget directors to make sure that we are doing okay. You guys ever have a question about this at any time, email me and I'll share it, okay, with anyone. When it comes to salaries and benefits, this is 7 years worth of data. So this particular snapshot is through the 20th year. This is regression analysis. All right, they might teach this, the new curriculum that we just adopted or are about to. I'll be happy to come teach this part one myself. So this is 7 years worth of historical data through the 20th payroll of the year. So really, again, like in this data point right here, we're at about 65.7% as of the 20th payroll, and that correlated to less than 97.5 by the final one. So really, we're trying to say, what can we learn through the 20th payroll, and where will we land by the 26th payroll? So in other words, this is this is where what percentage of the budget we spent through the 20th payroll, and where those final payrolls ended. So if history holds true, and we're at 68.6% right now, we are going to land at 100.6%. We're at 6% over budget in Fund 10 salaries, okay? But I'm not sounding the alarms. In our Fund 10 benefits, you can see we do the same analysis. We're at 63% of our budget, so we should we're under budget here. We'll only spend 94.1% of our budget. So when I add the salaries and benefits together, it will be under budget. That's my guess at this time. Why would we go over budget? There's explanations. Sometimes we have to hire long-term subs that were not a part of our salary plan when we were back in October finalizing this. Teachers leave on FMLA. Sometimes they choose not to come back to stay home with their baby through the remainder of the school year, or they're injured, whatever it might be. We hire long-term subs that just weren't a part of the budget and outside of our knowledge when we adopted a budget. Fund 27 salaries, we're at 62.4% of our budget expended. We think we'll end almost 6% under budget there. And likewise for Fund 27 benefits, we will be under budget there. So in totality, we are doing fine. What I want the community to know and the board to know is that our fiscal position is strong, and we have proper fund balance to handle unforeseen events. We have strong budget building practices. We build balanced budgets, and we track our budgets continuously throughout the fiscal year to make sure we stay on track. And it's my job to alert you if something's going wrong. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that if anything financially bad happens, that's my responsibility. And I know that ultimately the superintendent's the one that has to answer the questions, but the reality is that the finances are only going to be as good as someone in my position is going to make them. And that ultimately puts that responsibility on me. So it's my job to have the courage and the honesty to tell you when something's going wrong. And right now we are doing good. Okay, so I take great pride in saying that. Some years we will go over budget a little, and again, always with an explanation, a Fund 46 transfer. But more times than not, we're staying under, and either way, I will always explain that. So that's my presentation here about that. I want to take that opportunity. Again, you might see other districts that have situations. That's their story, and it's not ours. So any questions that I can answer in that regard?
Jake, the benefits tracking?
Yeah.
What was that budget based on the new insurance plan?
So actually, Jay, good question here. These benefits, so we have about like 7 buckets of employee benefit expenses. One of those is a year-end, our OPEB benefit. You know, a new teacher gets $1,000 per year of service. We wait to the end of the school year and we make just one lump sum transfer. How many teachers did we have with us? What did they accrue? Let's take that money out of Fund 10, set it down in Fund 73, and now we're fully funded there for years to come. Because that's an expense that doesn't grow from payroll to payroll, that's just a one-time, and the last June 30th we make that. That's not a part of this. I actually took out the health insurance from this, so this snapshot here are all payrolls that are all benefits that are dependent on payroll. So WRS is 6.8% of payroll, so it's dependent on salary. FICA tax, Social Security is 7.65% of payroll. That's dependent on. So this includes WRS payments, Social Security, life insurance, long-term disability, our alternative benefit for teachers that decline the health insurance benefit, and maybe there's one more. So the savings from the health plan would be in addition to that.
So in reality, you're tracking a little better than what this shows even.
I would say yes to that, yes. Other questions?
Jake?
Sorry, one other one.
Yeah.
What kind of, what's the return? So the cash, I mean, it looks like we can have 15 million in cash potentially at any given point in time. What kind of return do we get on that? What do we do with it?
Yes, good question. All right, so, well, it depends on the rate of return at the depositories that we're likely to adopt, so that our money is on deposit at Citizens Bank. Most commonly, school districts and towns, villages, cities will deposit their money at the local government investment pool. That's a safe depository where you can get a good interest rate and also a lot of liquidity. So if you need to get your money back, you don't have to wait 60 days to get it. So the LGIP is kind of the standard depository. Citizens Bank we've been banking with them for over 100 years. We were one of their original, or if not their original customer. They pay us 10 basis points higher than LGIP, so we have an incentive to bank locally, and typically all things neutral, do things local whenever you can and keep it in the community. So we've done that. As I don't have this as a part of my update here, because I'm not bringing a revenue report, but I'm giving an expenditure report. We budgeted that we would receive $150,000 in revenue earnings, on interest earnings, I should say, and we're clearly going to be about 4 times that. So we'll probably be between $600,000 and $800,000 in interest earnings and way beyond. Again, when we build our budgets, I can't tell you what the interest rates are going to be for 12 months, so I go low, and then when it comes in good, I say, hey, school board, nice job, way to go. You guys are great.
You're welcome, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, V. So yeah, it's a function of the rate of return of LGIP, and then we get 0.1% higher than that from Citizens. So right, yeah, this year we're doing well.
I'd imagine, yeah, but probably not for long. As rates start going down.
Yeah, well, hey, who knows?
If it actually happens. Okay.
No forecast.
All right. Any other questions?
No.
All right, then. So the very last thing, then, I just will walk through our on that topic. They're just our 23-24 budget year to date. So I'm going to open this up here. And we're in a good spot here. So just to explain to the community, we're 75% complete with our school days. We have 25% of our school days left. As a rule of thumb, we should have 25% of our budgets left. I talked about our salaries and benefits here. So for our Fund 10 salaries, I project we're over budget by $176,000, but we're under budget with our benefits by $270,000. That would be in addition to whatever we experience with our health insurance. For our Fund 27 salaries and benefits, we're collectively about $450,000 under budget there. So we are in a good shape with salaries and benefits. As for all of our other expenses, we have various funds. Fund 10 is our general fund. That's where most of our transactions take place. And again, if you just take a look at the percentage of the budget remaining, that will tell you the story about what's going on. So here you can see in this other category, We're over budget there, but it's by $24,000. In the grand scheme of $64 million, that's a super small percentage, and I'm not concerned with that at all. If somebody wanted more details as to why, I can get that for you. But if you go fund by fund, I can explain anything. The summary is we're good in each of our funds, and I have no concerns to share with you at this time. And then lastly, I do have our that same information that I talked about regarding our projection of salaries and benefits. I'll be providing that here every school board meeting here as we go forward and close out the school year. But we're in a good spot. That's it. I know I was long-winded. I apologize, Craig. But I wanted the community to know.
Keep that negative tertiary spending to a minimum, okay, Tom?
You got it. With the way he's talking there, you got some competition for treasurer, Jake. He's starting to pick up on this after 5 or 6 years. Took you a while, Craig, what you got there. All right, that's all I got.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Moving on to action items, hires, retirements, and resignations.
All right, I will be much quicker than Tom. So I have the following employees who were offered a contract for this upcoming year. Very excited. This was my first official hire for the 24-25 school year. We have Shelby Starrett, who is going to be recommended for our Parkview Middle School art teacher position. We have resignations that were submitted for Kim Chalicki, a Big Bend 6th grade teacher, and Catherine Schuerl, who is a work seminar business teacher at the high school. And then we received a retirement notice from Hallie Kelly, who is a Parkview Middle School ELA teacher. And so looking for approval of these.
I make a motion, we approve these hires and retirements.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Moving on to special meetings, SOAR building.
Yeah, so as we talked about earlier, we need to have a special meeting where people from the community can attend and approve the sale, or excuse me, purchase of the SOAR building, as we discussed. So looking to do that at our next meeting, so that would be at 6 o'clock. We would have a special meeting at 6 o'clock with the school board to follow on April 22nd.
I'd like to make a motion.
Second it.
Do a 6 p.m. next board meeting for the SOAR building.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries. Up next, we're going to have our executive session. According to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, we are going to be considering a complaint against a staff member and consideration of a strategy to be adopted related to potential claim concerning school funding.
I will make a motion that we go into executive session.
Second.
Wait, roll call, please.
Crosby,
Yes.
Erica not here, Jake,
Yes.
Gail,
Yes.
Dale,
Yes.
Vito,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Yes.
Craig.
Here.